This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
Part 3 of the prologue of Lord of Chaos.
The manor house was unfinished yet, the great room's tall wooden panels pale and unstained. But Faile ni Bashir ti Ibarra held court every afternoon, as proper for the Lord's wife, in a massive high-backed chair carved with falcons, just in front of a bare stone fireplace that mirrored another at the other end of the room. The empty chair by her side, carved with wolves and a large wolf's head at its peak, should have been occupied by her husband, Perrin ti Bashir Ibarra, Perrin Golden Eyes, Lord of the Two Rivers. Of course, the manor was only an overgrown farmhouse. The great room stretched fewer than 15 paces. How Perrin had stared when she insisted on it being that big. He was still used to thinking of himself as a blacksmith, or even a blacksmith's apprentice, and the name given her at birth had been Zareen, not Faile. These things did not matter. Zareen was a name for a languorous woman who sighed tremulously over poems composed to her smiles. Faile, the name she had chosen as a sworn hunter for the Horn of Valir, meant falcon in the old tongue. No one who got a good look at her face, with its bold nose and high cheekbones and dark tilted eyes that flashed when she was angry, could doubt which suited her best. For the rest, intentions counted a great deal. So did what was right and proper. Her eyes were flashing at the moment. It had nothing to do with Perrin's stubbornness, and little to do with the unseasonable heat, though in truth, futilely working a pheasant feather fan for a breeze against the sweat sliding down her cheeks did not help her temper at all. This late in the afternoon, few remained of the crowd who had come to have her judge their disputes. Actually, they came for Perrin to hear them, but the idea of passing judgment on people he had grown up among horrified him. Unless she managed to corner the man, he vanished like a wolf in fog when it came time for the daily audience. Luckily, the people did not mind it when Lady Faile heard them instead of Lord Perrin. Or few did, anyway, and those wise enough to hide the fact. "You brought this to me," she said in a flat voice. The two women perspiring before her chair shuffled their feet uneasily and studied the polished floorboards. Coppery-skinned Sharmad Zafar's plump curves were covered, if far from obscured, by a high-necked but barely opaque Damani dress. The pale golden silk wore at hem and cuffs, still with a sprinkling of small travel stains beyond cleaning. Silk was silk, after all, and seldom to be had here. Patrols into the mountains of mist, searching for remnants of the past summer's Trolloc invasion, found few of the bestial Trollocs, and no Myrddraal, thank the light, but they did find refugees nearly every day. 10 here, 20 there, 5 somewhere else. Most came out of Almoth Plain, but a good many from Tarabon, and, like Sharmad, from Ered Doman, all fleeing lands ruined by anarchy on top of civil war. Faile did not want to think of how many died in the mountains. Lacking roads, or even paths, the mountains were no easy journey in the best of times, and these were far from the best. Rhea Aveen was no refugee, for all she wore a copy of a Tarabonner dress in fine-woven wool, soft grey folds that molded and emphasized almost as much as Sharmad's thinner garb. Those who survived the long trek over the mountains brought more than troubling rumors, skills previously unseen in the Two Rivers, and hands to work farms depopulated by the Trollocs. Rhea was a pretty, round-faced woman, born not 2 miles from where the manor now stood, her dark hair in a wrist-thick braid to her waist. In the Two Rivers, girls did not braid their hair until the women's circles said they were old enough to marry, whether that was 15 or 30, though few went beyond 20. In fact, Rhea was a good 5 years older than Faile, her hair 4 years braided, but at the moment she looked as if she still wore it loose on her shoulders, and had just realized what had seemed a wonderful idea at the time was really the stupidest thing she could have done. For that matter, Sharmad seemed even more abashed. For all, she had a year or 2 on Rhea. For a Domani to find herself in this situation must be humiliating. Faile wanted to slap the pair of them cross-eyed, except that a lady could not do that. "A man," she said as levelly as she could manage, "is not a horse or a field. Neither of you can own him. And to ask me to say which has the right to him," she drew a slow breath. "If I thought Will Elsene had been leading you both on, I might have something to say on the matter. Will had an eye for the women, and they for him. He had very well-turned calves, but he never made promises. Sharmad looked ready to sink into the floor. Domani women had a reputation for twining men around their fingers, after all, not the other way around. As it is, this is my judgment. You will both go to the wisdom and explain matters to her, leaving nothing out. She will handle this. I expect to hear that she's seen you before nightfall. I let that run on for a little while, guys, because I just wanted to demonstrate the good parts of Faile. I do understand why some people find her chafing, but she does have a lot of qualities that I find to be endearing, one of which is wisdom.
Well, she's an excellent leader, and she understands how to lead the people of the Two Rivers in a way that no one else really does, because they haven't grown up around nobility and leaders, and they don't understand the sort of great covenant between nobility and the people they're supporting. And that's something that you see from not every leader in the world. A lot of them are simply doing it for power. You see Morgase really do it for the people, and a few other leaders, maybe Berlane, but it's rare to find a noble who's actually understands that they are a servant to the people, not the other way around.
She does do a good job here, and I have one more highlight, I think, to when the four wisdoms come and ask her about the weather. The wisdoms are worried because it hasn't rained in so long. It should be snowing by now, but it still hasn't rained.
Did you enjoy reading Pheasant Feather Fan a few times?
Yeah, I did stumble. Did you notice that?
That was stressing that 10 times fast.
That may be edited out in post, but maybe not. I don't mind. I think it's not a bad thing when sometimes I stumble in a read, and I feel like it makes me seem more real. And I am. I'm a dude. Believe it or not.
So I guess my question is, what do you think about Perrin's avoidance of his responsibility here? It's one of his main struggles going forward, and I'm curious, why do you think he, refuses to pass judgment and do the things that he knows nobles should be doing?
Perrin's been given his position, and Faile, I think, often feels frustrated with him, or has these feelings of frustration for him not doing his duty, in quotes, when, Faile knows what that duty is. Perrin doesn't. He truly does not. He has no idea what what his duties might be as a lord. It has to all be explained to him.
But even though, she's been you have to pass judgment, and he's avoiding it. So it can't just be ignorance. He knows what he's supposed to be doing. He's also avoiding it.
I suppose so. I think it takes a little more time than that to turn a blacksmith's apprentice into a lord of a large territory. I don't think he sees his own judgments as, how should I say, as legitimate. It's why should anyone care what I think? Which is a legit question. Why should anyone care what anyone thinks, I guess. But, right, someone has to pass this judgment.
Does he have any sort of official standing at this point? They're just asking him questions, right? Because they're building him a manor house. He's getting this big, which actually we heard Rand, was it Rand or Egwene? I think Gawyn popped back in and tell her on yacht and was like, wonder who's building that arrogant asshole a big house. And Perrin as well is this is way too big. Everyone from the Two Rivers is this is too big. And meanwhile, Faile's this is tiny. This is barely suitable for what we need.
Oh, Faile said it was, the great room in the manor is 15 paces, so 45 feet. That is a huge room. I understand why Perrin would be wait, but is that really necessary? It's a lot of resources for a waiting room.
But at the same time, what we're seeing is the birth of Manetheren, the birth of a giant metropolis, and he's going to be leading that, and he needs the space, because what we're seeing is, as people have been saying, a melting pot of people coming over the mountains and fleeing the Seanchan, fleeing the trouble in Ameth Plain and Terrebonne and Erdoman, and those places have been in turmoil for years and years and years, and people are taking the risk to flee across the mountains and are getting rescued, and basically are bringing in this place that was had no strangers for centuries is now all of a sudden getting refugees crossing the impassable mountains.
Yeah.
And that's making a lot of things change.
That opening scene was cute, or a good demonstration of Faile's ability there. But next, I feel like you'd kind of cued me to think of Faile's next conversation with Senbui, the Thatcher. We all know who Senbui is. And he has come to Faile today because he wants to complain that I believe a Tarabonner refugee happened to have a business. I think it was, yes, a Tarabonner refugee had a tile-making business back in Tarabon, like the kind of roofing tiles you might see on like a Spanish mission type structure, like clay roof.
Master Hornvale.
And he wants to complain to Faile, like, these people are coming and they're taking our jobs. And taking our jobs. He says that. Taking the food from our mouths. It's very, to politics today, that's a very hot spot in American politics and European politics. Australia, everywhere.
Just yesterday, Trump banned immigration for 6 weeks. So clearly, in the grip of a pandemic, that's what people are complaining about, So
Senbui's saying, well, they're taking my jobs, and Faile says something, stranger stealing food.
Her comeback is fantastic.
Faile says something like, well, Perrin and I have decided to have the manor thatched, but you haven't finished that job yet. It seems like you have so much work that you can't do it all.
Yeah.
So how about you finish my roof, and I'll see you later. Yeah.
How about you finish the jobs you have before you complain about not getting more jobs?
Which gave me the distinct feeling that if Senbui came to Faile and said, listen, I'm the Thatcher and I'm being put out of business, and, I don't have enough money to feed my family, Faile would have done something.
Sure, but that's not true. I mean, he's taken on apprentices.
But he's making money hand over fist. Yeah, you should just be him. He's got 3 or 4 or 5 boys working for him now too. Also, yeah. Sen, you're fine.
Yeah, no, I mean he's running a contract business. He's a contractor now. This is not some low level.
You don't get to make all the roofs now. You can do as much as you can.
And they're rebuilding all the old houses, plus a bunch of new ones for the new refugees. And her whole logic is basically new skills, they're creating jobs for the rest of us. It's all the typical, realistically, the people coming over are fantastic. For example, now we have the skills to make carpets out of the wool that we produce.
And cloth, and nice cloth as well.
And nice cloth, yeah.
The Two Rivers really only had limited capability before to make their own cloth. They mostly sold raw wool to be taken elsewhere.
And then had to buy the clothes basically had to buy the cloth back from somebody.
Probably.
Right? You lose a lot of money that way. It's
I'm sure there were looms in Two Rivers, but when I think of Nynaeve saying good, rough Two Rivers woolens, I think that's probably that's Emond's Field product. That's something that someone made in their kitchen.
And do you know how many people are buying Emond's Field woolens outside of Emond's Field?
Nobody.
Nobody wants to wear that shit.
Nynaeve. That's it.
Yeah. Not for long. Even she is on silk. Right now, she's obsessing over her blue silk dresses.
Stout Two Rivers woolens, I think, is another phrase. Reminds me of a coat I had when I was a kid, which I hated, but it was very warm. It was wool like that. The rough weave. I complained so much my grandma sewed a cotton t-shirt neck to the back of the coat so that it wouldn't rub my neck anymore. But that's what I think of when I think of Stout Two Rivers woolens. Not comfortable.
Get used to being itchy. But this is totally different. This is taking that wool and turning it into cashmere. And then all of a sudden the Two Rivers starts turning out cashmere sweaters. And you're like, oh, these are nice.
Or merino wool.
Yeah, totally. Master Luhan, he's got a whitesmith, which is someone who does gold and silver, even though there's not a lot of gold lying around. And the furniture maker has hired some apprentices.
I had a question. There was a trade listed somewhere in here. I can't find it off the But it's called a cutler, and I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't have a chance to look it up. Not everyone felt as Sen did about the newcomers. Harold Luhand, the Emmonsfield blacksmith, had gone into partnership with a Domani cutler and a whitesmith from Almouth Plain. And Master Aeder had hired 3 men and 2 women who knew furniture making and carving, and gilding as well, though there certainly was no gold lying about for that. Cutler.
A cutler makes cutlery.
Oh.
Which is silverware, dining in. So basically, the blacksmith went into business with someone who makes forks and...
That makes sense.
Like pewter and...
You would think
and knives. Yeah.
Harold's specialty is probably, larger tools and implements like...
Farming implements, axles, wheels...
chains. Yeah.
Champing knives, that sort of thing, yeah.
As opposed to a silversmith, which would make like fine, delicate things, or a cutler, which would make small tools.
Mm-hmm. Eating tools. Your fine silver is going to be made by a cutler.
Good knives and swords and things. My understanding is limited, but I do understand that you use different materials and things. So she smacks down Senbui, who's just a jerk. We all do that.
Stop complaining about immigrants, folks, please.
At some point, she's thinking of she's the eldest surviving child of Davern Bashir, and she thinks of his titles, and I just wanted to know, I won't even bother reading it, but it's like 4 lines. It's a short paragraph, her dad's titles.
Who is, I believe, currently hanging out with Rand, right? He has given his loyalty to Rand.
Yeah,
Davern
Bashir just had his meeting in Camelin. Could even be happening right now with Rand.
And yeah, we don't really have the context of exactly when this is taking place. In my head, I have I headcanon that this is actually taking place parallel to some of the events in the previous book, because they leave and start traveling for Camelin, and then the next scene we see them get there. It just seems like there may be a bit of flashing back with the timeline. I'm not exactly sure when in the timeline this prologue takes place. But to me, it feels like it's a little bit back in time to during Fires of Heaven.
Oh yeah, I'm rarely 100% sure, but I suspect this is happening around the same time, a little before, a little bit after, maybe, of the last chapter of Fires.
Sort of what's been happening with Perrin and some of these other off-screen characters. People coming over the mountains who saw like potential mines, so we're going to see probably Manetheren open the mines back up, and a lot of that wealth is, we're seeing all of a sudden the Two Rivers is going to be a source of high-quality wool goods, and really like mined ores, and that is going to add to the silversmiths and such that you have. You're talking some really, really high value items. Probably not like spices and herbs, but well worked silver items and tobacco and high quality wool items are all very expensive.
Yeah, we've talked about this many times, but I see the Two Rivers often as like the Shenandoah River Valley in the States, or you could say maybe like the Wales region of the UK, where there's like lots of mining, but the temperature's the same. The climate seems to be the same. Like they grow the same things.
I kind of see Faile suffering from a southern summer here with the sweat and the humidity.
Yeah, and I think of Shenandoah too, more so than maybe somewhere in the British Isles, because it's just such a huge region. It's enormous, Yeah.
You have that giant stretch of mountains that are the Appalachians.
And it's
the border
still largely, those mountains are, well, now they're protected, but they're still totally undeveloped. Like there's a lot of wilderness there.
Very hard to pass over, right? I mean, they are the Mountains of Mist, for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, tough to pass over. I figure the Mountains of Mist are a lot bigger than the Appalachians. They're newer mountains, I guess you might say.
That's a good point. Yeah. They are probably
snow-capped.
Yeah. But like, God, I mean, I used to go up to I can't remember the name of it, but it was one of those points. It was on the West Virginia border, and you basically have to travel a ridge for a while in a car, or you could look down a cliff on both sides at the same time. And you start traveling up and up and up and up and up and up and up, and you get to the top of this thing, a reddish knob. That's what it was called, reddish knob.
Reddish?
Reddish knob, yep.
Oh, I don't think I've been to that one.
So reddish knob was something I'd go up to, and man, looking out over the hills of, because you're on the border, so you're basically at one of the highest points, and you look over the hills of West Virginia, and it's a crazy wilderness of up and down and up and down, and you can look at that and be like, there's no way I couldn't get through that. Like, you would travel 5 miles a day, like, maximum. Like,
yeah. Through hiking in that region on the Appalachian Trail is when they say most people quit, because the work is just as hard as anywhere else, but you can't see where you're going. Call it the green tunnel effect. You walk 200 miles, everything looks exactly the same. No difference.
No difference. Yeah, no, it's gorgeous, but you're in this sort of green, overgrown space.
Every once in a while you climb up to a peak, and it's so, like, misty and foggy all the time, you can't even see the vistas most of the time. So you're just in this haze walking for a month until you get out of West Virginia into Pennsylvania.
And again, mountains of mist to a T, right? You just have this constant overhanging fog and mist that keeps you from seeing anything. Sort of adds to the reputation of them being cursed.
Oh, yeah.
But it's very fun to have been in those mountains and to know that Robert Jordan was living next to them and really sort of had them in mind when he was writing Mountains of Mist. And
that's why I feel so strongly that the Two Rivers is Shenandoah, and the mountains are a little bigger, and, you know, that things are a little more extreme maybe, and he lived there. So it makes sense that his most important characters would come from a place that he was very familiar with, you know.
And it also helps explain some of their backward Southern attitudes.
There is the modesty stuff and the
treatment of women, and yeah, that's just very like that Southern gentleman, putting women on a pedestal that like they need to be protected at all costs. Like, that's something I heard constantly in the South. I grew up with that. Like, that is not something that he pulled out of his ass out of nowhere. That is part of the culture of that area.
Sure.
Or at least was, so, everyone's like, it's so unrealistic and it drives me nuts. And I'm like, actually,
it's not
like, I knew a lot of dudes like that. I don't agree with it, right? But I know a lot of people who have that, like, women should be protected at all costs. You should never, ever punch a woman, even if they punch you first. Like, all that sort of, like, that attitude is real and it exists in the area.
Yeah, although it's frustrating to read sometimes, I never felt particularly surprised about Rand's weird list and things like that. It seemed like it made sense to me.
Sure, especially as nuts as he is.
Not because it's correct, but you know what I mean.
It's correct for him, not necessarily correct. He's not doing the right thing, but it's what my character would do.
Yeah, and I feel like I kind of even want to admit, like, when I was like 18, 19, 20, I don't know how far beyond that sort of thing or thinking I had progressed that,
That's a good point, yeah.
Grouping women and children into the same category and stuff like that is very much common.
Women and children first.
It's common. I just feel like I should repeat. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm saying that it exists, and that's what it is.
And there's a whole bunch of names. I can go through them. I have them all open in tabs, but most of these are one-off characters who really just pop up to complain to Faile. Maybe they've popped up one or two more times. The furniture maker gets mentioned 3 times through the whole series. Like, he's the furniture maker in the Two Rivers. He gets mentioned in Eye of the World, in Shadow Rising, and here in Lord of Chaos. This is the last time he gets mentioned. It's like, do we really need to bring him up again? Probably not. These 2 women, Rhea and Sharmad, are totally into Will Alcine, which we didn't really talk about, but,
Will Alcine's a babe, apparently. This is not a new story.
But again, those 2 are only in this scene. We never see them before or again, So it's there's not really a lot to say about them. Adele is this brings us to the wisdom. So they have a little bit more of a backstory. These 3 women, Elwyn, Adele, and Mila.
Yeah.
But Like, Mila, the only thing that we have about Wikipedia, she is young. Like, that's literally the only fact we have about her. So these are really, really shallow named characters. We actually have, in a lot of ways, I think there are characters who are not named with a lot more background story than some of these Two Rivers folks.
So we have, it is four, right? Daze, Adele, Elwyn, and Mila. That's it.
Oh yeah, I didn't bring up Daze, because Daze Conger is a bit of a more major character.
Yeah. So I guess that also means that there are more wisdoms than what were towns before. There was, because, wait, we had...
No, there was the four, because we had Devon Ride, Emmons Field, Terran Ferry, and
Watch Hill. That's what I was forgetting.
But as Faile says, all of these wisdoms are taking on apprentices, and lots of them.
Several, yeah.
Things are getting big, fast.
We were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but this is one of those things that I would love to watch the progression of. Like, what happens? How does a society develop, with Perrin and Faile as kind of the top of the pyramid, but then we have, like, wisdoms and mayors underneath that?
Sure, you've got the women's circle and the mayors and the village councils, and they all meet and sort of have pledged fealty to Perrin.
And the women's circles, which will handle their various, for instance, Faile sends the two women to Daze, wants Daze to handle their dispute over the boy. Two farmers are arguing over the boundary of their property, and Faile notes that they probably came to her because they knew what the village council would have done if they had brought it to them. So it's really their job. But this is like the Supreme Court, They're trying to take it a step up.
Town's rights, right?
Yeah. To appeal directly.
You have sort of the towns are like local states, and then Faile and Perrin are the federal, in quotes, government. Who rule all of the various, like, little townships in the Two Rivers.
Maybe governor over mayor under president or later.
Yeah, if you want to talk about that's a bit of an odd situation, because those almost become partners. They become like a kingdom within a kingdom, because it's like it's not a state. It's almost its own independent thing.
But they'll kick up taxes, like a state does. If they can, and if they can't, then the idea is that Camelin will help.
Yeah, it feels more like there was a separation, like in the U.S., if instead of reintegrating all the states, you kept a separation between the North and the South, and the South kind of like governed itself independently, but still paid taxes to the U.S. government.
That's true. The area that Perrin is kind of claiming in the end is huge. It's about the size of what Andor was. Or what Andor really controlled before, perhaps is the way I should say that. Not
what Andor was on the map, but what Andor actually was able to lay claim to.
Yeah. Daze bringing up the boys. Yeah. This is a longish read, and I felt like Faile really shined in this.
Yeah, this is a great response.
This is Daze talking. Or beginning the meeting with Faile. 3 more boys have run off, my lady. Her tone fell halfway between respect of the words and the "now you listen to me, young woman" she sometimes used. Davai Ellen, Ewan Finnegar, and Elam Dowtrey run off to see the world because of Lord Perrin's stories about what's out there. Faile blinked in surprise. Those 3 were hardly boys. Dav and Elam were as old as Perrin, and Ewan was her own age. And Perrin's stories, which he told seldom and reluctantly, were hardly the only way Two Rivers youths learned about the outside world now. I could ask Perrin to speak with you if you wish. They stirred, Daze looking for him expectantly. Adele and Mila automatically smoothing their skirts. Elwyn, just as unconsciously drawing her braid over her shoulder and arranging it carefully. Abruptly, they realized what they were doing and froze, not looking at one another or at her. The one advantage Faile had with them was that they knew the effect her husband had on them. So many times she had seen one or another firm herself up after a meeting with Perrin.
Do you think that's Ta'Veren effect?
Absolutely. Plainly vowing not to let it happen again. So many times she had seen resolution fly out the window at the sight of him. None was really sure whether she preferred to deal with him or with her. That will not be necessary, Adele said after a moment. Boys running off are a bother, but only a bother. Her tone had slid a little further from "milady" than Daza's, and plump Elwyn added a smile suitable for mother to young daughter. "As long as we're here, my dear, we really might as well mention something else. Water. You see, some of our people are worried." "It hasn't rained in months," Adele added, and Daze nodded. This time, Faile did blink. They were too intelligent to think Perrin could do anything about that. "The springs are all still flowing, and Perrin has ordered more wells dug. Actually, he only suggested it, but it had come to the same thing, fortunately. And long before planting time, the irrigation canals from the Waterwood will be done. That was her doing. Half of the fields in Saldea were irrigated, but no one here had ever heard of the practice. Anyway, the rains have to come sooner or later. The canals are only in case." Daze nodded again, slowly, and Elwyn and Adele, but they all knew this as well as she. "It isn't the rain," Mila muttered. "Not exactly, anyway. It isn't natural. You see, none of us can listen to the wind." She hunched her shoulders under the other's sudden frowns. Plainly she was saying too much, and giving away secrets besides. Supposedly, all the wisdoms could predict the weather by listening to the wind. At least, they said they all could. But even so, Mila plowed on doggedly. "Well, we can't. We look at clouds instead, and how the birds behave, and the ants, and caterpillars, and—" Drawing a deep breath, she straightened, but still avoided the other wisdom's eyes. Faile wondered how she managed to deal with the women's circle in Taryn's Ferry, much less the village council. Of course, they were as new at it as Mila. That village had lost its whole population when the Trollocs came, and everyone there was now new. "It isn't natural, my lady. The first snow should have been here weeks ago, but it might as well be the middle of summer. We're not worried, my lady. We're frightened. If nobody else will admit it, I will. I lie awake most nights. I haven't slept properly in a month, and—" She trailed off, color blooming in her face as she realized she might have gone too far. A wisdom was supposed to be in control at all times. She did not run around saying she was frightened. The others shifted their gazes from Mila to Faile. They said nothing, faces expressionless enough for Aes Sedai. Faile understood now. Mila had spoken the simple truth. The weather was not natural. It was most unnatural. Faile often lay awake herself, praying for rain, or better still snow, trying not to think of what lurked behind the heat and drought. Yet a wisdom was supposed to reassure others. Who could she go to when she needed reassurance? Herself. These women might not have known what they were doing, but they had come to the right place. Part of the compact between noble and commoner, ingrained in Faile from her birth, was that nobles provided safety and security, and a part of giving security was to remind people that evil times were not forever. If today was bad, then tomorrow would be better, and if not tomorrow, then the day after. She wished she could be certain of that herself, but she had been taught to give those under her strength even when she had none herself, to soothe their fears, not infect them with her own. "Perrin told me about his people before I ever came here," she said. He was not a man to brag, but things had a way of coming out. "When hail flattens your crops, when the winter kills half your sheep, you buckle down and keep going. When Trollocs devastated the two rivers, you fought back, and when you were done with them, you set about rebuilding without missing a step." She would not have believed that without seeing for herself, not of Southerners. These people would have done very well in Saldea, where Trolloc raids were a matter of course, in the northern parts at least. "I cannot tell you the weather will be what it should tomorrow. I can tell you that Perrin and I will do what needs to be done, whatever can be done, and I don't need to tell you that you will take what each day brings, whatever it is, and be ready to face the next. That is the kind of people the Two Rivers breeds. That is who you are."
Again, I feel this section is particularly appropriate in today's environment where healthcare workers are scared and looking for reassurance as we all turn to them and look for reassurance.
A lot of leadership is posturing.
Making it look like you know what you're doing.
And showing people that there is someone who has this in hand. Even when things seem a little out of control, that there are people with all the power and all the money, and they are gonna make sure stuff gets back to normal. Just knowing that.
fear is a lot of what causes the panic. The panic is what causes the bad actions. The bad actions actually cause the bad outcomes.
Oh, sure. All the great leaders have said stuff like that. Remember, we are not descended from fearful men. Who would say that they were descended from fearful men? Nobody, you know. But it puts a little steel in your backbone to hear that.
It's silly, but I was thinking, like, when I'm cleaning the kitchen at the end of the night, if I'm the only person there, if the bartender's already left, it's so hard to stay motivated. But if someone else is there, someone else is just in the other room doing their own work, that's enough to keep me motivated. Just knowing that someone else out there has expectations of me holding my shit together
Totally
is helpful. And assuming that person is also going to hold their shit together.
Yeah, if you're the only person that cares, it's hard to hold yourself responsible for yourself. But when you know you're letting someone else down, then there's this sudden motivation, you know.
I can let myself down all day. I do that like on a regular basis. But letting other people down, that's hard. I love the little behind the scenes about the wisdoms, about how much of their supposed power and wisdom is just like, not fakery, but knowledge that's passed on. They're not special. They just like teach each other about the caterpillars and the worms, about how to predict the weather. They don't, Nynaeve was extremely rare in terms of being able to read the winds and actually reading the winds. And as we find out, it's like, honestly, I think reading the winds is always about trouble. It's just when you're a farmer, trouble is usually weather related.
Oh yeah. We've talked about this before. I don't know if you remember, probably a really long time ago, but I always suspected that that's why Nynaeve feels the storm coming. She thinks it's a storm, but actually it's just trouble because her world has changed. She's still kind of geared to think of, if she senses a bad thing coming, what would be bad for the two rivers? What would be bad in her world? And that's, a terrible hailstorm or something like that. Whereas as she's moved out into the world and she's doing, playing political games and things like that, she still senses the weather of the room, say.
Sure. The pressure in the room, the
energy, some might say.
Yes. And the fact that can lead to bad outcomes and storms and bad things, for me, it feels like it's related to foretelling with the one power. Like reading the weather is a foretelling talent. In
a sense, it would kind of. Yeah, in a sense, it is.
Not so much in the words, but in the feelings. If foretelling is a prophecy talent, then reading the winds is the empathy version of that, where you get feelings about the future rather than knowledge about the future.
Yeah. Quick question. I don't want to drive us too far down a tangent hole, but this is kind of interesting. Do you think, and I'm just curious what your opinion is, it's probably something we'll never know. Do you think the listening to the wind talent, capital letters talent, is more related to like what a doomseer does or what a weather worker does?
What do you mean by weather worker?
Like a
wind finder?
Yes.
I think it's closer to what Min does, but I think it's you're talking about Min as someone who sees prophecy with not related to the power. And then you have like a Lyda who has foretellings related to the power. And then you have Nynaeve who has feelings about the future related to the power. And those are definitely like all are slices of foretelling. And clearly the power gives you access to see some of the pattern, but not necessarily necessary to see slices of the pattern.
I'm nodding. I think whatever it is that Nynaeve is doing, and whether or not that is even listening to the wind as she thinks it may be, or as she was told it was by someone who couldn't channel, I think it's more related to reading the pattern than it is. They call it listening to the wind because that was largely what it was used to do in that region.
Sure. Well, here's a question. Can you listen to the wind if you cannot channel?
That's kind of what I was getting at. Is it a real capital T talent, like a sniffer or a dreamer?
Because my understanding is it's always an offshoot of channeling. There are no non-channelers who can listen to the wind.
I want this to be a thing. I want it to be a capital T talent that some people just get.
So do you think there are wisdoms in the Two Rivers who can read the winds, but weren't sparkers, weren't natural channelers, didn't go through that whole thing, who can't channel?
I'm going to go out on a limb, and even though I can't prove it, I'm going to say yes.
See, I'm going to disagree and say no. I think all the folks in the Two Rivers area who can read the wind...
That it's a channeling-related talent?
That it's a channeling-related talent, not a non-channeling-related talent, yeah.
Yeah, that would fit the story a little bit better, knowing that channelers often got moved into these positions in society where they could use their abilities without really knowing. And I suspect that that's why we have, like a rich vein of channeler blood, for lack of a better term, to mine in the Two Rivers when the Aes Sedai eventually find it. Like, oh my god.
And we know channelers feel affinity for other channelers. So, it makes me think that a wisdom would take on an apprentice. Well, if she can feel that she might not know what it means, but it's like, oh, I have this affinity for this person, so they're going to be good at the job.
Yes. But, well, we know the person that trained Nynaeve did not channel, but I guess we'll never know if she could have.
Right. And
therefore, sense the spark. And, maybe just interpreted that as I have a really good feeling about this girl. I want you to send her to me for training. That's how I imagine that stuff goes down. Some old wise lady says, this young kid has the talent for this special trade, and and the parents are just stoked on it. They're like,
well, and we know so little of Nynaeve's background. We know her father taught her to hunt, but he's long gone out of the picture. We don't have any information about her mother. Nynaeve's backstory, despite loving her as a character, we don't get a lot about her family. We really don't have a lot of history on what she was before she was the wisdom.
But that seems a little bit actually a lot like Perrin's situation, where he thinks a good bit more about his family than Nynaeve does, who doesn't seem to think of her family very much at all. But she's a good deal older, and they both were sent at a young age to go apprentice somewhere, and they lived there, So Perrin's parents, in a way, were partly the Luhans and partly his own. They did the second half of raising him.
He apprenticed at a young age, and that's, I think, something that's pretty common is the apprenticeship, where you grow up with somebody, but then you're
11, 12, they send you to go learn a career.
And you end up being kind of part of that family for a while. Now, and I think in this kind of society, a lot of people apprenticed with their father, and that's how you end up getting professions passed down from father to son.
Yeah, not everyone apprentices. Rand just stays with his dad. Presumably, if none of this had ever happened, he would have just inherited the farm one day and continued running it.
Probably would have married a Gawyn, she would have moved out there, they would have raised a bunch of little children on sheep and tobacco. Assuming he wasn't a channeler and going insane. Or the Dragon Reborn. I'm
reading what Travis is writing now, that he said he thinks at some point Moraine explains it as being a talent of air and water, listening to the wind.
Again, that's might be a little more eye of the worldism.
It could be. I'm kicking myself right up. All wisdoms claim to be able to listen to the winds, but few actually can. Yeah, and so most just use the kind of tricks that Mila, I think, described.
Which doesn't specifically tell us that, it's a rare talent. We don't necessarily know that it's channelers only from that sentence, and also just the way Moraine makes the connection to be like, oh, you have wisdoms who can read the winds. That means you have wisdoms who can channel, right?
Yeah.
That she makes that association immediately. And it's from that is able to be like, so you've had a bunch of women die from channeling sickness, right? And describes it. And she's like, yeah, that's happened. That combined with Varen coming back and pulling a whole freaking gold mine of channelers out of the Two Rivers. And then Taim basically doing the same thing. It's like, wow, there's, it's not surprising that the wisdoms use the latent ability to channel in order to read the winds.
I'm looking for the next place I want to pick up. Faile offers the wisdom's tea and offers to further discuss how to hearten people about the weather, but they decline and leave. They just needed to hear that themselves, I think. And Faile hears thunder, and she goes to find Perrin because she thinks it may be about to rain, and that would be exciting. because it's been so long.
Oh, I missed that. It must just be heat lightning.
Yeah, it was. It's mentioned later. It was just heat lightning. It doesn't actually start to rain. We see Perrin watching Aram train with Tam.
Right. Yeah, we see him, and just amazingly trying to show how quickly Aram has gotten good with the blade, because he's pressing Tam, who was a blade master.
Yeah.
Interesting here, he states it right out that, like, Tam was a blade master.
Yeah.
I guess it's obvious because he had the sword, but...
Well, Perrin knows now. I'm not sure how many others would do, but some do. Nynaeve knew some things. I don't know if she knew he was a blade master, but she knew he served in the military and things like that.
We get to come back and see these characters again. I mean, Perrin, Tam, Loyal, all the Two Rivers. I just missed them so much in the last book. Like, Fires of Heaven definitely had a hole where a Perrin-shaped hole in my heart for Fires of Heaven.
Aww.
I like him. He's like, I've said before, and I'll say it again. I'm a Perrin guy. I'm a dog guy. I like to, the quiet, contemplative sort. I like him a lot. He's always been my primary boy, if you want to. That's sort of a weird way of saying that, but
of the three, primary boy. I hear you. After this, I just have a bit of a readout for. It's basically Perrin and Faile's conversation and then a read-in for Gawyn, which the Gawyn section's blessedly short.
Yeah.
Although there are some cool insights in it. It's cool to see what's happening on the other side, if you will,
Totally.
Coming in, this will sound a little out of context, but it'll make sense in a second. I used to hunt rabbits with Gwyll, Perrin said. He's only a few years older than me, and he used to take me hunting sometimes. It took her a moment to remember what he was talking about. Gwyll is trying to learn how to be a footman. You don't help him when you invite him to go smoke his pipe with you in the stables and talk horses. She took a deep, slow breath. This would not be easy. You have a duty to these people, Perrin. However hard it is, however much you want not to, you have to do your duty. I know, he said softly. I can feel him tugging at me. His voice was so strange that she reached up to grip his short beard and make him look down at her. His golden eyes, still as strange and mysterious to her as ever, looked sad. What do you mean? You might think fondly of Gwyll, but It's Rand, Faile. He needs me. The knot inside her that she had been trying to deny clenched even tighter. She had convinced herself this danger had gone with the Aes Sedai. Foolish, that. She was married to a Ta'veren, a man fated to bend lives around him into the shape the pattern required, and he had grown up with two more Ta'veren. One, the Dragon Reborn himself. It was a part of him she had to share. She did not like sharing even a hair, but there it was. What are you going to do? Go to him? His gaze shifted for a moment, and her eyes followed. Against the wall leaned a blacksmith's heavy hammer, and an axe with a wicked half-moon blade, and a haft a pace long. I couldn't. His voice was almost a whisper. I couldn't find how to tell you. I'll go tonight, when everyone's asleep. I don't think there's much time, and it could be a long way. Master Althor and Master Cawthon will help you with the mares, if you need it. I spoke to them. He tried to make his voice lighter, a pitiful effort. You shouldn't have any trouble with the Wisdoms, anyway. Funny, when I was a boy, the Wisdoms always seemed so fearsome, but they're really easy as long as you're firm. Faile compressed her lips. So he had spoken to Tam Althor and Abel Cawthon, had he? But not to her. And the Wisdoms! She would like to make him wear her skin for a day to see how easy the Wisdoms were. We can't leave as quickly as that. It will take time to organize a proper entourage. Perrin's eyes narrowed. We? You're not going. It will be... He coughed, went on in a milder tone. It will be best if one of us stays here. If the Lord goes off, the lady should remain to take care of things. That makes sense. More refugees every day. All those disputes to be settled. If you go too, it'll be worse than the Trollocs around here. How could he think she would not notice such a clumsy recovery? He had been going to say it would be dangerous. How could his wanting to keep her out of danger always make her feel so warm inside at the same time it made her so angry? We will do what you think is best, she said mildly, and he blinked suspiciously, scratched his beard, then nodded. Now it was only necessary to make him see what really was best. At least he had not said right out that she could not go. Once he dug in his heels, she could as easily shift a grain barn with her hands as shift him, but with care it could be avoided, usually. Abruptly, she threw her arms around him and buried her face in his broad chest. His strong hand smoothed her hair softly. He probably thought she was worried about him leaving. Well, she was, in a way, just not about him leaving without her. He had not yet learned what it meant to have a Saldean wife. They had been getting on so well away from Rand al'Thor. Why did the Dragon Reborn need Perrin now? So strongly that Perrin could feel it across however many hundreds of leagues lay between them. Why was time so short? Why? Perrin's shirt clung to his sweaty chest, and the unnatural heat sent more sliding down her face, but Faile shivered.
The need of Rand to save him from Dumai's wells. It's already calling to Perrin. Although he probably should talk to his wife before making those decisions. As Morgase tells him, don't try and marry people without talking to your wife first. It's like, seriously, like, don't you talk to everyone else. The leaders, you're basically trying to cut me out of the decision-making and the process. You're going to leave me here and go off to do who knows what? No, I'm coming with you.
I liked that her first reaction was, yeah, sure, we can, it's going to take a little longer than that for us to get ready.
Because he's thinking he's going to go back and do, Eye of the World style, hop on a horse and ride off into the sunset. And just,
single-handedly
right.
run in and save Rand from whatever. Sure.
No, first of all, he needs his army. Like, he needs his Two Rivers bowmen. They are the core of the folks who rescue Rand, really. Besides the Aiel and a few other, and like I believe the Defenders of the Stone. And of course, who can forget the Black Tower and the Mahale. It's always an interesting thing that he's needed to save Rand from Dumai's Wells, but I always, Dumai's Wells is kind of a victory for the bad guys anyway.
What do you mean?
Oh, just that, like, gives Rand PTSD, even though he gets rescued. Like,
oh, I see what you mean.
We've talked about how, like, Taim going in and saving Rand is sort of like the bad guy's plan in the beginning, which is drive the dragon insane and then unleash him on the world.
Lord of Chaos.
Let the Lord of Chaos rule. Lord of Chaos being a totally insane dragon reborn.
One hand on his sword hilt, Gawyn Trakand bounced a small rock on his palm as he made another circuit of his men, checking their positions around the tree-topped hill. A dry, hot wind, carrying dust across the rolling brown grasslands, fluttered the plain green cloak hanging down his back. Nothing to be seen but dead grass, scattered thickets, and a dotting of mostly withered bushes. There was too much front to cover with the men he had, if it came to a fight here. He had grouped them in clusters of 5 swordsmen afoot, with bowmen 50 paces back up the hill. 50 more waited with the lance and horse near the camp on the crest, to be committed where necessary. He hoped it would not be necessary today. There had been fewer younglings in the beginning, but their reputation brought recruits. The added numbers would be helpful. No recruit was allowed out of Tar Valon until he was up to standard. It was not that he expected fighting this day more than any other, but he had learned it came most often when unexpected. Only Aes Sedai would wait until the last minute to tell a man about a thing like what was going to happen today. "Is everything well?" he said, stopping beside a group of swordsmen. In spite of the heat, some wore their green cloaks so that Gawyn's white charging boar showed, embroidered on the breast. Jisao Hamora was the youngest, still with a boy's grin, but he was also the only of the 5 with the small silver tower on his collar, marking him a veteran of the fighting in the White Tower. He answered, "All is well, my lord." The younglings deserved their name. Gawyn himself, a few years past 20, was among the oldest. It was a rule that they accepted none who had served in any army, or borne arms for any lord or lady, or even worked as a merchant's guard. The first younglings had gone to the tower as boys and young men to be trained by the warders, the finest swordsmen, the finest fighters in the world, and they continued part of that tradition at least, though warders no longer trained them. Youth was no detriment. They had held a small ceremony only a week past for the first whiskers Benji Dalfor had ever shaved that were not fuzz, and he bore a scar across his cheek from the tower fighting. The Aes Sedai had been too busy for healing in the days right after Swan Sanche was deposed as Amyrlin. She might still be Amyrlin, if the younglings had not faced many of their former teachers, and bested them, in the halls of the tower. "Is there any point to this, my lord?" Hal Moore asked. He was 2 years older than Jisao, and like many who did not wear the Silver Tower, he regretted not having been there. He would learn. "There isn't a glimmer of Aielman." "You think not?" With any hefting to give warning, Gawyn hurled a rock as hard as he could at the only bush close enough to hit, a scraggly thing. The rustle of dead leaves was the only sound, but the bush shook just a bit more than it should have, as though a man somehow hidden behind it had been struck in a tender place. Exclamation rose from the newer men. Jasau only eased his sword. An Aiel, Hal, can hide in a fold in the ground you wouldn't even stumble over. Not that Gawyn knew any more of Aiel than he read in books, but he had read every book he could find in the White Tower's library by any man who had actually fought them, every book by any soldier who seemed to know what he was talking about. A man had to ready himself for the future, and it seemed the world's future was war. But if the light pleases, there won't be any fighting today.
So basically, they're meeting with the Shaido. This is definitely sort of a Jisao, Benji, and Hal. They have mixed fates, but they're basically all part of the younglings. Jisoo is the second in appearance to Gawyn. He survives Dumai's wells. Benji actually is killed by the Shaido, and Hal Moore survives Dumai's wells. But we don't get a lot of detail about the younglings after Dumai's wells. We see some Gawyn perspective, but mostly he's away from the younglings. So I don't see a lot more of these characters doing anything.
And as you mentioned, Gawyn is here, and he mentions, or in his perspective that I read just a moment ago, that his Aes Sedai hadn't told him that they were going anywhere until earlier that day or something. And where they're going is to meet with these Shaido Aiel.
I mean, the Tower Aes Sedai really do try and get the younglings killed. Certainly, Elaida does. She finds them inconvenient, which I never fully understood why. It seems like they're dedicated troops, but, Gawyn has too much independence of thought, I think, for Elaida.
He's not truly underneath. I feel like his loyalty to the tower, although I suppose it's been tested in a way, and that's why Elaida can't just get rid of him, literally.
I think the problem is he's allied with the tower, not with Elaida. Yes,
and Gawyn demonstrates, like you said, a lot of independence. He doesn't seem like a servant, ever. He does what he does.
And when you have this cult of personality, as we're learning, you have to say, you have to be a yes man. You have to absolutely agree with the person in charge.
You're a soldier. Yeah, it's kind of the job,
Right. But in some ways, the warders, in a lot of ways, are subservient to the Aes Sedai because they're
absolutely
bonded.
Yeah.
The younglings don't have that obligation.
Right. They're not tied directly like the warders are.
They're their own independent fighting force that happens to be based in the White Tower.
And the younglings are loyal to Gawyn, not to anybody else. I think that makes them dangerous in a way.
I would disagree with that. I think they're loyal to the White Tower. Because when he leaves the younglings, he's like, I can't tell them where I'm going because they'll kill me. He doesn't have...
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I always saw them as more loyal to him than...
Because there's that whole scene where he, goes to flee, and he, prepares to fight. This veteran is going to stop him, and he's like, I have to leave. And the veteran's like, all right, I don't think you're making a mistake, and if anyone else caught you, they'd kill you.
Oh, I forgot about that.
So he very much is not, he's in charge of them, but they are not loyal to him. They are loyal to the White Tower. And I think the problem is they're loyal to the tower and not to the leader, not necessarily to Elaida, right?
Yeah.
And they have a very, I want to say, just like Gawyn, a very black and white picture of the world. They're loyal to the tower and the person in charge of the tower without any sort of shades of gray of, well, she kind of got there illegally and maybe the right thing to do would have been not rise up against the warders and protect the, it maybe there's a reason the warders rose up. Maybe you should have actually listened to your elders and not killed them.
Yeah, I always thought that was strange.
But that's where I really do think the younglings have this sort of blank loyalty to the White Tower and whoever's in charge. I kind of think of it as a soldier who's loyal to the president.
Right.
And the office of the president, not necessarily to the particular office holder.
Nothing.
And that blind loyalty can be good, but not always. Not always. Yes, and bringing up the fact that even after making that decision, he then he killed his best friend. I don't know. He's so inconsistent. This is where my Gawyn hate is starting to come out, because I'm just why can't you just make a goddamn decision and stick with it?
Yeah. Initially, in my first reads, I really wanted to sympathize with Gawyn because it is a very confusing position that he was put in. All of a sudden, he's, he has to make this choice. And all he knows is that the Hall did this vote, and Swan is not going to be the Amerlin anymore, and that's what, the people in charge say, but all of his teachers and other authority figures are fighting the other authority. It's tough.
And one of the things that really bugs me about Gawyn is when all the women in his life say, hey, listen, your sister and the woman you love are part of the rebellion. What the fuck are you doing? And he's like, no, I have to support the White Tower for them. And they're like, no.
What?
What? Like, he just ignores the what the women around him are telling him. And that bugs the fuck out of me as well. Because, no, Rand didn't kill your mother.
Right? Do you want to find a little confirmation before you go making really serious decisions, I don't believe, anything anyone tells me without confirming it.
And, he believes a rumor over what his sister is telling him. Min. That's right. Thank you, Aradia. Over what Min is telling him, right? Rumors over Min. Min who he knows, Min who he helped get out of the freaking...
He doesn't think they know what they're doing or talking about.
Yeah. God,
so he just, tries to make decisions for them.
Right. The wrong decisions.
Well, we see, after that little scene, we see Gawyn talking to some of his younglings. We're in his head a bit. He watches the wise ones climb up the hill, where half a dozen Aes Sedai waited with their warders, those who had warders. There are 4 warders there.
The only real Aes Sedai I wanted to bring up was Corin. She is the leader of this group, up until the point where they take Rand captive, and then Galena takes over. Because once they have a man who can channel in captivity, the Red takes over. Not because she was gray.
Gotcha.
Corin, and so she was in charge of negotiating, but once it became a captive situation, Galena, the Red/Black, takes over. So she seems to be negotiating in good faith, up to a point.
Yeah.
She's although in charge of the delegation, Galena now usurps her, claiming that their mission is now the business of the Red Ajah. This had been agreed upon as the fallback position if negotiations failed. So basically, she had a chance to, convince him to come back. And she's convinced that he's going to come back of his own will. She just needs to present it to him in the right light. But if that fails, the kidnapping is always an option.
We see Gawyn thinking a little bit about the White Cloaks. I think we've talked about the White Cloaks movements a lot in the last few episodes, and it's not too important. At least in at the end of Fires, there's a lot about that.
I think the conclusion I came to is that Pedro Niall is pulling his White Cloaks back to Amadicia in order to hopefully use the Queen Morgase to take Andor.
Yes.
Yeah. And we do see a little bit more of his POV in a few chapters, and we get some more of his plans. They're complicated because he's trying to do stuff with Saldea. He's starting rumors. He's basically he's realized that the lion he set loose on the plains has grown too big too fast for him to deal with, and so he's decided to go another route.
Mm-hmm.
But he dies before his new plan can really come to fruition.
Yeah, none of this ever comes to anything.
No.
More mentions of the sere, windswept grasslands. Everything's dry.
I love this quote. He had no right to even think of her, but abandoning the tower would be abandoning her. For such flimsy reason did a man choose his fate. Knowing they were flimsy did not change them, though. And I think that's one of the reasons, not only is it flimsy, but it's wrong.
Sure.
Choosing a tower is not choosing a Egwene Elvir.
He just makes some really bad decisions, and it would help if he, listened to others, sometimes. I try not to be a hater, but,
yeah.
Man. It certainly can't justify any of it. All I can say is that he was definitely in a very hard position. I doubt many people would do a much better of a job. Many teenagers too.
And what I find interesting about this section too is right before Gawyn is told that Rand may have killed his mother, he says the line, Gawyn had rather liked Rand al'Thor. He regretted the man had turned out to be what he was. So like almost seconds before he turns on Rand, he thinks about how much he liked him.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't like the fact that he was a man who could channel, but he says, like, I liked him.
And he's basing that decision based on wrong information. Rand didn't kill Morgase.
No.
He just chooses to believe it for some reason.
Not only did he not kill him, he took revenge on his killer.
Yes.
On her killer, sorry.
So what Gawyn basically spends the rest of the book trying to do, avenge his mother, or a lot of it is already done. More or less. I mean, the first part anyway. Morgase goes through a lot more that could use some avenging, but...
Right. But you know who does that? Galad. Galad goes after the man who raped his mother.
It's true.
Galad's the one who gets legitimate revenge. And then, yeah, this Mill Tessin, as far as I could tell, he's just literally just a random farmer spreading rumors. Gawyn would have heard this from somebody. It's all over the place. There's no specific reason why this guy told him.
It was almost unbelievable. Elaida had been a Red before she became Amyrlin. Reds hated the very idea of men channeling. They did not think much of men in general, for that matter. I should interrupt myself and say what Gawyn thinks is almost unbelievable is that the White Tower would try to ally itself with the Dragon Reborn, or bring the Dragon Reborn into its fold, rather. Yet the fall of the once invincible Stone of Tyr, fulfilling prophecy, said Rand al'Thor was the Dragon Reborn, and even Elaida said the last battle was coming. Gawyn could hardly reconcile the frightened farm boy who had literally fallen into the royal palace in Caemlyn with the man in the rumors that drifted up the river Erenin to Tar Valon. It was said he had hanged Terran High Lords and let the Aiel loot the stone. He had certainly brought the Aiel across the spine of the world, for only the second time since the breaking, to ravage Cairhien. Perhaps it was the madness. This just gives us a little window into Gawyn's head about why he's doing the things that he's doing.
And he's so close and yet so far on those assumptions, right? Like, Rand didn't let the Aiel loot Cairhien. Like, there were two different groups of Aiel, and like, it's just that the information, the subtleties haven't gotten to Gawyn, and so he's believing all these rumors that are like painting a very different picture of Rand than the reality that we know.
And in typical RJ style, like a lot of what Gawyn knows is indeed true. It's just so out of context, he has no idea what the hell he's talking about.
Exactly.
Rand did hang Terran High Lords who murdered and raped people. And he did let the Aiel loot the stone, precisely 1/5 of its value. So, it's like Rand wasn't fond of it either, but these are...
Yeah, and he didn't loot the stone. He basically collected taxes from the stone.
Yeah.
That's not looting. That's a percentage for rulers, which is probably less than the nobles took from the farmers. And like Gawyn himself, like, is from the tradition of Morgase and probably would have, hung those rulers himself if they'd been doing what they did in Tyr in Caemlyn. Right?
Definitely.
Like, that is
almost
not
definitely.
acceptable behavior. Almost definitely. Like,
Morgase certainly would have.
If he was there, I guarantee he would support almost 100% of all the actions that Rand took.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just the information he has is so out of context.
It's also what he wants to believe, too, right? He wants to believe that the Dragon Reborn is a bad person. He wants to believe that he's supporting the right side.
Sure.
The side that's doing good.
Yeah, I think everyone wants to believe that.
We're all heroes in our own stories.
We see a bit about a peddler kind of ambling along, and that's more or less the beginning of my readout. Gawyn thinks it's strange that there's a peddler coming by because they're kind of in the middle of nowhere. Gawyn doubted there was as much as a farm within 10 miles. Parlous times indeed, Master Tessin. Aren't you afraid of Aiel? Aiel, my lord. They's all down in Cairhien. Old Mill can smell Aiel, he can. Truth. He wishes there was some here. Fine trading with Aiel. They got lots of gold from Cairhien. And they don't bother peddlers. Everybody knows that. Gawyn forbore asking why. If the Aiel and Cairhien made such good trading, the man was not heading south. What news of the world, then, Master Tessin? We're from the north, and you may know what hasn't caught us yet from the south. Oh, big doings southward, my lord. You'll have heard of Cairhien, him that calls himself dragon and all. Gawyn nodded, and he went on. Well, now, he's taken Andor. Most of it, anyway. Their queen's dead. Some say he'll take the whole world before... The man cut off with a strangled yelp before Gawyn realized he had seized the fellow's lapels. Queen Morgase's dead? Speak, man, quickly. Tessin rolled his eyes, looking for help, but he spoke, and quickly. That's what they say, my lord. Old Mill don't know, but he thinks it's so. Everybody says it, my lord. Everybody says this dragon do it. My lord? Old Mill's neck, my lord. My lord? Gawyn jerked his hand away as though burned. He felt on fire inside. It had been another neck he wanted in his hands. The daughter heir, his voice sounded far off. Is there any word of the daughter heir, Elaine? Tessin backed away a long pace as soon as he was free. Not as old Mill knows, my lord. Some say she's dead, too. Some says he killed her, but old Mill don't know for sure. Gawyn nodded slowly. Thoughts seemed to be drifting up from the bottom of a well. My blood shed before hers. My life given before hers. Thank you, Master Tessin. My blood shed before hers. That was the oath he had taken when barely tall enough to peer into Elaine's cradle. You may trade with... Some of my men may need... Gareth Bryn had had to explain to him what it meant, but even then, he had known he had to keep that oath if he failed at everything else in his life. Jasau and the others were looking at him worriedly. Take care of the peddler, he told Jasau roughly, and turned away. His mother dead, and Elaine. Only a rumor, but rumors on everyone's lips sometimes had a way of turning out true.
Not this time!
He climbed half a dozen paces toward the Aes Sedai camp before he knew it. His hands hurt. He had to look to realize they were cramping from the grip he had on his sword hilt. He had to force them to let them go. Gawyn and the others meant to take Rand al'Thor to Tar Valon, but if his mother was dead, Elaine, if they were dead, he would see whether the Dragon Reborn could live with a sword through his heart.
Such an empty threat.
I mean...
I don't know. Yeah, just
he
like...
never would be able to track down Rand.
No. Or threaten him in the slightest. It's like... It feels like some guy on the internet being like, I'm going to find you, and come to your house, and I'm going to beat you up. And you're like, I'm waiting. Yeah, good luck. Like, man, it's just so fun to hate on Gawyn. He's so terrible. And like, in that way, he's also a very well-written... Hi, Timber. He's a very well-written character, because I can hate him.
Yes, and like I've said a bunch of times now, he's in a really confusing situation, and he is a believable character. You know, like his logic at the end here is like kind of skewed, but he's in a weird place in his head. He's afraid the world's going crazy around him, and now some random peddler is telling him that his mom and his sister are dead at the hands of the Dragon Reborn. And he even has the thought, only a rumor. It's only a rumor that a lot of people are saying.
And yet, a lot of people are saying it.
It is possible that it's true. But then at the end, he's already at, if his mother was dead, if they were dead, he would see whether the Dragon Reborn could live with a sword through his heart. Well, wait a minute. Don't you want to check your sources, my dude? Like,
what if someone else killed them?
Yeah. Before we go making
what if
decisions.
They're not dead?
Let's just make sure we know. Oh, boy. But again, you know, I could see how any normal human being who just thinks he learned that his mom is dead, and his mom and his sister were murdered, might not make the best decision.
Well, and don't forget, like, there's so much inherent prejudice against the Dragon Reborn. The Dragon Reborn is the boogeyman. He is the one who will destroy... Like, prophecy has told Gawyn his whole life the Dragon Reborn is a terrible... It's a shame what he turned out to be. A pedophile, a Dragon Reborn. You know, like, same,
yeah.
Same kind of...
It's a shame what he turned out to be.
Yeah. So, of course you believe the worst. Of course you believe the worst thing. I'm
nodding.
Of course that man killed your wife and mother and sister. It's a shame. I liked him. Turned out to be seemed like a nice, quiet neighbor. You know, like, sort of saying that in the same tone of voice, that when you find out this person is a terrible, you're like, I didn't know. But that doesn't mean that you have any sympathy for them anymore.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, you know, that makes you turn on them more. To be like, ugh, I trusted you. I thought you were a good person, and it turns out you're this awful Dragon Reborn thing. Ugh. I'm disgusted. So in a lot of ways, I do think Gawyn's reaction is very legit. And again, I'll say it again. One of the reasons I hate him so much is because he is so well written. Asshole.
Yeah, no real intro here because this is such a long air quote chapter. I'm not sure what to call it, other than, a 90-page prologue.
I mean, this is the first of the mega prologues that Jordan throws our way, as far as I can tell. We've had a couple of, little prologues in other books, but, Fires of Heaven didn't even have a prologue. And then here we are, throwing a huge amount of secondary characters and plot into the prologue. Even some prime characters.
Yeah, this is huge. But really fun.
I kind of really love Jordan's prologues. They're some of my favorite parts of his, the middle books. I think a lot of people got frustrated because so much happens in the prologue and then there's some slowness in the middle. But I love that still there's stuff happening in those prologues. They're just fun chapters.
It sets up a lot, and I feel like prologue is almost an inside joke amongst Wheel of Time fans. Everybody knows what you might be.
Oh, you mean the first third of the book? Yeah.
You mean the novella that you read before you read the actual novel?
The background novella that Robert Jordan writes to help you understand the world before he gets into his main characters.
I've literally read shorter books than this prologue.
There's been short stories that have won awards that are shorter than these chapters and prologues. Did set up a nice long last battle chapter, though.
Heck yeah. And I think a huge part of what makes why people love this series is how expansive it is. You have to kind of like that to like Watt at all.
It's definitely unique. I feel like that's something you don't find in a lot of other books, that even if the world's big, you don't get this much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, by definition, I guess, because it's such a long series.
Although I do hear, I think, as much lamenting amongst Wheel of Time fans as fans of any other sci-fi or fantasy genre, that they just as much want more as any fan of any other series or show or movie.
Yeah, there's never going to be enough.
No.
Never going to be enough. Well, and there's so many untold stories, and each story leads to another untold story that it's sort of builds on itself, right?
Yeah. There's more information.
Yeah. I mean, just in this chapter, we've got the three boys that are going to take off, and we never hear from them again. You could write a whole nother book on what they do between now and the last battle.
It would be could be an interesting book,
Little fanfic on you and Fingar?
A miniature hero in a world of great heroes. This little boy is just out there surviving. I'm calling them little boys, but they are Perrin's age.
And I'd love to see, hey, these three boys go out into the world not being Ta'veren, and I'd love to see them, fall on their freaking faces. I think that would be a fun story to write.
Didn't even make it out of the village. Could very well be. Who knows?
Get robbed in Terran Ferry, and, nearly starved to death, and I don't know, you could just do a whole, getting split up.
They're going through a really dangerous part of the world.
And they're young boys. Very young. Younger than the Emond's Field 5 were when they left. And they don't have an Aes Sedai to watch over them.
Yeah, I think Perrin mentions one is his age and the other two are slightly younger or something like that.
Mm-hmm. We're covering some of people's two least favorite characters in this next section. There's a lot of hatred in the fandom towards Faile. Which I don't agree with, and an immense amount of hatred toward Gawyn, which I, of course, do agree with. Mostly because Gawyn should be hated. That's sort of what he's written as.
Do you think so? Do you think that's what RJ was thinking when he wrote Gawyn? Someone has to mess up, so I'll write that character now.
Not so much that, I think, as he wanted the character to evolve. in what looked like, hey, I love the contrast of the two brothers, where you have the brother who's least liked ends up being sort of the better of the two brothers.
In the long run.
Yeah, and you see in Gawyn someone who just can't get his priorities straight. Also, let's go into the Arthurian legend, like, what happened to the Gawyn character?
Sir Galad.
Not Sir Galad. Gawyn.
Sir Gawyn.
Gawyn, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So, if you look at his story, it did not go well. And there's a very clear parallel between Gawyn and Gawyn.
He is one of the Knights of the Round Table. He is usually the son of Arthur's sister in the story, Morgase, or Anna, sometimes, and King Lot of Orkney. One of his brothers is called Gareth. He's a formidable, courteous, and compassionate warrior, fiercely loyal to his king and his family.
Yeah, the death of Gawyn's brother, Sir Gareth, well, in this case, it's really his mother and sister, has caused Gawyn, one of the mightiest warriors at court, to become the bitter enemy of his once greatest friend, Rand. It's loose, but...
Oh yeah, RJ uses that over and over.
Gawyn was mortally wounded in a fight with Lancelot. Well, in this case, it's not so much Lancelot, but
Demandred.
The opposite of Lancelot, Demandred. So yeah, there's some parallels there in his death and trying to take revenge against the hero because of the death of the loved one. It's pretty obvious that he used the Arthurian legend to sort of generate a storyline for Gawyn and Galad. I think the whole palace in Andor is entirely, if the names don't point it out enough, the whole thing is just lifted directly from Arthurian legend.
The name Morgase is a straight-up rip-off.
Yeah.
So's Galad. It's not really a rip-off, because this is the Arthurian legends are just that. They're like, there's any number of different kinds of tellings, and the story ends differently sometimes.
And there is the whole, legend becomes myth thing that we talk about, that our Arthurian legends are actually...
It's not really a rip-off.
No.
It's a retelling.
Yeah. Rip-off in the everything's a remix sense of the word. He also ripped off the Fremen for the Aiel, but we don't complain about that too much.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
Glad someone did. It's such a great concept.
Yep. Well, and they're not an original concept either. There are, desert-dwelling warriors with magic spices is not necessarily a unique idea to Dune.
Oh, of course not. No. A lot of RJs and the stuff in Dune is based on real life.
Not only real life, but I want to say there was other desert-dwelling magical people, for a long, long time. I guess that's all the common, yeah. I guess you can even go back into a lot of legends and be like the Jinn, basically. Which Jinn and Jen Aiel obviously have some similarity in flavor.
In the name. Jinn are demons, right?
Depends on what you want to call them. They're not demons in the same way that Western folk have demons. They're magical beings who exist and aren't necessarily, they're more chaotic than evil.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?